Hey, what's up guys? This is part 3 of my series on how to record drums, and in this video we're going to go over signal flow. It's very important to understand the ins and outs of the signal flow for your own setup, so that way you can be efficient with setting up your recording sessions and diagnosing any problems that can arise within the signal chain. So I'll just start by going over the basic setup for an 8-channel audio interface, which is most common for recording drums, and then I'll go over my personal setup to show you how I incorporate other gears such as external mic preamps, my click track, vocal mic, etc. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, let's begin with a basic 8-channel audio interface. I'll use the Focusrite Liquid Sapphire 56 as a reference since I'm most familiar with it, but these principles are usually the same for other brands of interfaces. So looking at the front of the unit, you can see that there are 8 modules with controls for each input. These controls are for things such as input gain, phantom power, high-pass filters, etc. To the right of those is the monitor section, which controls the output volume to your speakers. And to the right of that are your 2 headphone outputs. This is a typical layout for an 8-channel interface. Now looking at the back of the unit, you can see the 8 XLR inputs for the microphones going from right to left. Below that, you have your 2 monitor outputs for your speakers. And to the left, you have various connections. The only ones I really use are the Firewire ports and the optical ports for connecting to other expansion devices, such as microphone preamps. So the connections for a typical 8-channel interface would look something like this. Now this particular interface connects to the computer via Firewire, but a lot of interfaces now use Thunderbolt, so that will vary depending on what interface you use and what connections your computer has. The studio monitors are connected to stereo outputs 1 and 2, with output 1 going to the left speaker and output 2 going to the right. The microphones are connected into the XLR inputs, and a typical setup for drum recording would go something like this from right to left. Overhead left, overhead right, kick, snare, tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, and the last input could be whatever you want. Maybe a room mic, or an outside kick mic, or a snare bottom mic, for example. But this configuration is the simplest way to record a full drum set with multiple microphones. Also make sure that phantom power is enabled on the condenser microphones, in this case the 2 overhead mics. Now the signal flow in this setup would go like this. You start recording in your DAW, you play the drums, and the sound from the drums goes into the microphones. Those signals are carried through the microphone cables into the XLR inputs of the interface. Those signals are then amplified by the microphone preamps in the interface and then converted into digital information through the analog to digital converters. That information is then sent to the computer via Firewire, where your DAW will record that information and represent it as audio waveforms on each track. Once the recording is done and you play back what you've recorded, the DAW sends that information back to the interface to be converted into an analog signal that goes to your speakers and headphones for monitoring. And that's basically it. That's how the sound from your drums gets to your computer and back. So if you understand that process, then you are well on your way to learning how to record drums. Okay, so now I'll show you the signal flow for my personal setup here. I have the kick going to input 1 and the snare going to input 2. I do that because the first 2 channels on this interface have the Focusrite Liquid Preamp technology, which can be fun to play around with. You can get some different preamp sounds that way, so that's why I put the kick and snare there. I put the rack tom to input 3 and the floor tom to input 4. And on these last 4 channels, I'm actually replacing the built-in preamps with the 428 preamps. And the way I do that is by connecting the outputs from the 428 to the line inputs on the Sapphire. I then set these 4 channels to line input instead of mic input, and I make sure that all of the gain knobs are turned all the way down. That basically just turns these 4 channels into A to D converters for the sound coming from the 428. Now, the microphones that I plug into the 428 are all of my condenser microphones. So overhead left, overhead right, my front kick mic, and the shotgun vocal mic. So I like to have this preamp. Again, it's something that's not really necessary. I could just as easily use the built-in preamps on the Sapphire and nobody would really know a difference, but what's the fun in that, right? Okay, now with the Octopre, again, this is expanding my channel count to 16, and I have this connected to the Sapphire with 2 optical cables via ADAT in the back. And I used to use a lot more of these channels in the past when my drum set was bigger. Now that it's kind of condensed, I'm really only using the first channel for my metronome from the iPad. So right now I have an 1/8 inch to XLR cable coming from the iPad to input 1 of the Octopre, and that's working pretty well. Right now it's kind of overkill. You know, I have 7 unused inputs, but I like knowing that I can use those if I ever want to use more microphones or expand my kit in the future. So that's what I use the Octopre for. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about real quick is the patch bay at the bottom. Now again, this is just an accessory to make connecting your microphones easier, but it is pretty awesome. So the way this thing works is, on the back of it, you have XLR outputs that connect to all the XLR inputs on the interface and the preamps. So it's basically just functioning as a middleman between the microphone cable and the input I'm trying to go to, which makes connecting the microphone extremely convenient and easy from the front instead of having to go into the jungle of cables in the back. So if you are going to be, recording drums and putting together a rack, I would highly suggest getting an XLR patch bay that you can put on the front. Okay guys, hopefully that kind of gives you a better idea of the signal flow for a basic recording setup and what I personally use for my studio here. So that's going to do it for part 3. In part 4, I'm going to go over how to set up your DAW for recording. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.